Of all the Buddha's students, one of them could do things that sound less like religious discipline and more like superpowers. He could walk through walls. He could look across every realm of existence at once: heaven, earth, the realm of hungry ghosts, hell itself, the way you might glance across a room. His name was Maudgalyāyana. The texts remembered him as foremost among the Buddha's disciples in psychic power. So when his mother died, he did the thing that kind of power should make simple. He sat in meditation, gathered every bit of that famous concentration, and looked for her. He checked the human realms first. Nothing. He checked the heavens, where the good and fortunate are reborn. Still, nothing. And then, according to the account preserved in the Yulunpen Sutra, a text that shaped Buddhist practice across China long after it left India, he looked somewhere he hadn't wanted to look and found her. The most powerful meditator among the Buddhist students could see across the entire architecture of the universe. And what he saw was that all of it wasn't going to be enough to save her. To understand why this story mattered enough to build an entire festival around, one still celebrated across East Asia. Every year you have to understand what kind of son Maudgalyāyana was before any of this happened. He'd given up family life entirely to become a monk, the way the tradition asks. No property, no home, no obligations to anyone but the practice. That's not a small detail. Buddhist monastic life was built quite deliberately around cutting exactly the kind of family ties that were about to pull him back in. But when he looked into the lower realms and found his mother reborn there, starving, none of that training mattered anymore. He wasn't a monk with unusual powers in that moment. He was a son who had just found out his mother was suffering. If you've ever lost a parent and found yourself wondering afterward about all the things you never knew about them, what they carried, what they regretted, what they might have done that they never told you, you already understand the feeling this story starts from. There's a particular kind of grief that isn't about missing someone. It's about realizing, too late to ask, that you only ever knew part of them, the part they showed you, not the part they carried alone. Maudgalyāyana had the same question everyone has. He just had the terrifying advantage of being able to answer it. What he found was worse than simple suffering. But to reach her, the accounts suggest, he first had to pass through realms most beings never glimpse even once. Other Buddhist texts, written centuries later, describing the architecture of these lower realms in obsessive detail, speak of places where frostbite blisters cover the skin until it looks strangely, almost beautiful, like a body wrapped in blue lotus petals. Of places where black lines appear on the skin on their own, marking where the suffering is about to begin. Some later accounts describe these realms in extraordinary detail. The earlier story of Maudgalyāyana himself does not give us the same elaborate map, but somewhere in that architecture of torment, in the account as it's usually told, he found the one person he was looking for. His mother had been reborn as what the tradition calls a hungry ghost, a Preta, a being with a stomach the size of a mountain and a throat the width of a needle, starving by design, unable to swallow more than a grain at a time, no matter how much hunger clawed at her. Maudgalyāyana wasn't looking at a hungry ghost. He was looking at his mother. The texts are specific about why, while she was alive, she'd taken donations that were meant for the monastic community. Food and money given by others in good faith, intended to support monks, and kept them for herself. Not a dramatic crime, quiet, private one, the kind almost no one else would have known about. And according to this account, it followed her. Maudgalyāyana didn't hesitate. He used his powers to bring her a bowl of rice himself, flew it directly to her, using the very abilities that made him famous among the Buddhas. Students determined that his strength alone would fix this. He watched her snatch at the bowl with both hands, starving, desperate, and the rice burst into flame before it reached her mouth. This is the moment the whole story turns on, and it's worth sitting with because it's not really a story about hell. It's a story about the limits of love when love is the only tool you have. Maudgalyāyana had walls he could walk through, distances he could cross in an instant, sight that could see into realms most beings never glimpse. None of it mattered here. The fire wasn't punishing him. It was simply what her own past actions had built around her. A condition his devotion, however real, could not override by sheer force. He went back to the Buddha the way anyone goes back to a teacher when they've discovered the limits of what they can do alone. Not what should I feel, but what can I actually do? And the Buddha's answer wasn't a lecture on karma in the abstract. According to the sutra, he told Maudgalyāyana the truth plainly. Her actions had consequences that could not simply be overridden by his personal power, even his love. Love cannot cancel causality by wanting to hard enough. If that were the end of the teaching, this would be a story about helplessness. It isn't, because the Buddha didn't tell him to give up. He told him something Maudgalyāyana, for all his abilities, hadn't considered. This isn't a problem you solve alone. The Buddha's instruction was specific. On a certain day each year, the day the monastic community completes its reigns. Retreat, months of concentrated practice together, the collective merit generated by that entire community, offered all at once, carries a weight that no individual effort, however powerful, can match on its own. Make offerings to the gathered monks on that day, the Buddha told him. Not to me, not to any single teacher, to all of them, together. Let their combined practice do what your own power alone could not. Maudgalyāyana did exactly this. And according to the account, it worked. His mother was freed from her suffering, released into a better rebirth, through a door that only opened when his effort joined with everyone else's instead of trying to carry the whole weight by himself. The story isn't claiming that one person's wholesome action simply erases what another person did. It's showing something more specific, that merit, generated and dedicated with sincerity, can be shared and directed toward someone else, becoming part of a field of support no single person's effort could build alone. This is the origin in this telling of what became the Ghost Festival, Yulenpen in Chinese, still celebrated across China, Vietnam, and much of East Asia on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, usually in the middle of August. Families bring food and offerings to Buddhist temples. Monks accept them on behalf of the wider community. Walk into some of these temples during the festival today and you'll find something that collapses the distance between Maudgalyāyana's story and this moment entirely. Many monasteries stage performances of his journey, his search, the burning rice, his return to the Buddha as part theater, part ritual. And during these performances, families who have lost someone recently are invited up onto the stage itself, carrying photographs of the person they buried, asking the actor playing Maudgalyāyana in front of the whole congregation to go and find their loved one too. The story never really stopped being told in the past tense. Every year, new people join it in the present tense instead. And the belief carried forward from this story is the same one. Maudgalyāyana learned firsthand that this collective offering can reach backward, easing the suffering of ancestors who may still be caught somewhere in the realms of torment or hunger, the way no solitary act of devotion, however powerful, was able to reach his own mother alone. Many families repeat these same offerings privately too, at ancestral graves, at small altars, kept in the home, carrying Maudgalyāyana's discovery into spaces far smaller than a temple. It's worth pausing on something a little strange about this story because the tradition itself doesn't hide it. Buddhist monastic life was built around leaving family behind. That was the whole architecture of what Maudgalyāyana had committed to, and yet here is one of the most celebrated stories in East Asian Buddhism, built entirely around a son's devotion to his mother. Historians of religion tend to read this as something quite specific, a story that let Buddhism take root in a society, China, that was organized at its core around filial piety, around children's duty to their parents. When Buddhist monks first arrived from India, this was one of the sharpest points of friction, a Confucian society watching young men shave their heads, leave their families, and refuse to carry on the family line, which by Confucian standards was itself close to a betrayal of one's ancestors. A tradition that asked people to renounce family found a way to speak directly to a culture that considered family obligation close to sacred, not a contradiction so much as a bridge. One story holding both commitments without asking anyone to choose between them. Maudgalyāyana gets to be both things at once. The monk who left everything, and the son who went further for his mother than anyone with a home and a family ever could. This is also why many scholars believe the fullest version of this story, as it's known today, took the shape it did in China, specifically more than in the Indian Buddhist texts that came before it, a story about a real disciple of the Buddha, reshaped and expanded by the culture it arrived in. Maudgalyāyana wasn't the last person, in Buddhist storytelling, to travel somewhere none of us can verify and come back with a warning. Centuries later in Thailand, a monk named Phra Malai would make the same kind of journey through the same imagined realms, not to save his own mother but simply to look and to return with messages for the living about what they still had time to change. In Tibet, the traveler became, in some of the most well-known accounts, a woman, someone who died, crossed into the realm of judgment, and was sent back specifically to preach on what she'd seen while the living still had time to listen. The tradition even has a name for this figure, a dialogue, one who dies and returns, and it continues into the present. In recent years, an American Buddhist practitioner described a version of this same experience after his heart stopped during surgery, turning what he saw into a graphic novel instead of a chanted manuscript. Different centuries, different cultures, the same underlying instinct that somebody needs to go look and come back and tell the rest of us. Some Buddhists then and now read all of this literally. Real realms, real suffering, waiting on the other side of a life, lived carelessly. Others read it as a map of something closer to home, the hunger that can't be satisfied no matter how much is consumed, the burning that follows a small private theft nobody else ever finds out about. The tradition doesn't fully resolve which reading is correct, and it's worth being honest about that rather than picking one side for you. Here's what doesn't depend on resolving that question, though everyone at some point discovers the edge of what their own strength can do for someone they love. Maybe it wasn't a mother reborn as a hungry ghost. Maybe it was someone in a hospital bed and you would have given anything, done anything to reach past the machines and the diagnosis and simply fix it through will alone, and discovered, the way Maudgalyāyana did, that devotion isn't the same thing as power, and power isn't always the same thing as enough. What this story offers at the point where individual strength runs out isn't resignation. It's a door most of us don't think to look for, the idea that some kinds of suffering aren't solved by one person trying harder. They're eased by many people, ordinary in their own individual strength, showing up in the same direction at the same time. Notice for a moment whether you've quietly assumed some Weight has to move through you specifically and nowhere else. Most of the time, that assumption is invisible until you look for it directly. Maudgalyayana didn't see it either, not until a bowl of rice caught fire in his own hands. Who is it you've been trying to save alone? Maudgalyayana had walked through walls. He'd crossed realms most beings never see. And the thing that finally reached his mother wasn't any of that. It was a bowl of rice, offered by hands that weren't only his. Next time, we'll go further into the realms he glimpsed on that journey, the architecture of Buddhist hell itself, and why a tradition famous for peaceful meditation also built some of the most elaborate places of torment in religious history.